Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, hello, how are you? Hello, hello, it's good to see you. Anyway, now I've finished activating the PTSD amongst the parents listening. Hey, we're here again after a bit of time off, actually. It's been a good kind of 9-10 days since last podded, Sam. I saw Justin Fletcher, aka Mr. Tumbled, live with my daughter, which was great, hence the songful introduction. And also was at my in-laws over the weekend. So yeah, quite a long break. Not really thinking about anything to do with fantasy football, apart from obviously seeing the scores, what's gone on in the FA Cup, what's gone on in the Carabao. And we're here to finally dig into fantasy football once more. Hope you're all doing well. And we're back in our usual Tuesday slot, armed with far more information than last week now to chew through with, as I mentioned, those Carabao Cup games done and the FA Cup draws done as well, albeit one was much more impactful than the other. And of course, I'm joined as always by Sam. All good, mate. I hear you've started a new job and are loving it.
Yeah, it's been a good start to the week. I'm officially freelance from this point forward. So if anyone wants a social media manager at any point, let me know. But yeah, all jokes aside, very, very happy to not be commuting into London every day and have a little bit more sleep. So hopefully a little bit more awake towards the end of today's pod, because I am a little better rested than usual. So fingers crossed that comes across in the pod and I make some better points than I often do when it gets to about 10:30 in the evening. In the meantime, though, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll be doing a quick review of the team updates. Obviously, not much has happened since we last podded, but it's obviously good to just have a quick look over and see where we're at, because it was quite a while ago and it's the longest game week of all time, it seems. So we need to remind ourselves. But since we last podded, we have importantly got the Carabao Cup semi-final results and some FA Cup results, which help to colour in some of the chip strategy landscape that we now have a bit more of an idea on, and basically it enables us to plan ahead a little bit better. So we're going to preview the week ahead as well, with that added information, of course, helping us along the way. The usual stuff in terms of the knee-jerk transfers, captains and bold claims, plus a discussion on where we might be heading over the next few game weeks. It's Tuesday, the 11th of Feb, 9 days since the last show, and the Merseyside derby, which wraps up game week 24, is still tomorrow. So it's a long old game week. We're not quite there yet, but we're closing in on it. How are we doing so far, Tom?
Yeah, doing all right. I think it's been one of those that's, as we said last week, a little bit sort of, a bit of a grey arrow all round, I guess. And we're kind of hopeful that tomorrow's Merseyside derby goes the blue way, really, isn't it, for both of us?
Yeah, for sure. And we've both got two Everton assets, both defensively covered off with one each, although different ones. And then David Moyes for the assistant manager for both of us as well. So I've got Pickford in goal, 9-pointer for him so far. That assist will live long in the memory. Moyes himself has got 12 points, which is a fantastic return from the first game. Puts him marginally ahead of Slot right now, although you'd think Slot is the favourite to maybe overtake him tomorrow night. In defence, my only returner was Trent, obviously came off and is a doubt going into tomorrow. We'll have a brief discussion on him, I'm sure. But from what we can tell, he looks fairly unlikely to play. There is a chance because he was in training today. But because he's in training, he might well come back in for Wolves and the double game week to come. So that might not be the end of the world. A little bit frustrating, though, if he doesn't play tomorrow. In the midfield, the only returners for me are Salah, who I captained, but lost rank on because there are the triple captains out there. Palmer with 6 points didn't really do me much good. And up top, Gakpo got me the assist. So 81 points because of the assistant manager basically made it not such a terrible game week. But I'm a down, I think, about 50k. So it would be quite nice to regain some rank tomorrow via most likely the Everton boys.
Yeah, a similar situation for me. So got pretty much, I'm not going to read off because it's pretty much the same team as yours. Single game week is for both of us absolutely nothing. As I said last week, a bit of a disappointment all round. And Jai, for me, with the goal, is kind of the key difference between us, I guess. Who was brought in for Raul Jimenez. Now that looks okay. Last week I was resenting that a little bit because we didn't know, of course, whether Fulham would have a double. That's now gone. On top of Trent, also Mikalenko missed out in the FA Cup due to a calf something or other, but it sounds like he's back in training as well. So we'll need to see what happens between Mikalenko and Trent tomorrow. It could well be that I end up with just kind of a Salah, which, as Sam mentioned, is a negatively impactful captain, Gakpo and Njai in that game. But hey, we need to see. And yes, just hoping for the Everton table bonus, effectively. Like, I'll take a draw right now if you handed it to me, of course. But yeah, I think it's like a 10k rank drop for me, something like that. It's not very big at all. But yeah, a lot of that kind of hinges on David Moyes hopefully getting me some more points tomorrow before he is invariably moved on. And that is the main topic of today. It's AMming and Aahing. I suppose it's from our point of view because we both got the assistant managership active. So it's not umming, it's AMming. But yeah, there's so much more in the offing in terms of chips to talk about. Aware that obviously lots of people haven't played their assistant manager, so we're not going to just kind of frame it from our own perspective here. I think the count was that half of the top 10k, just to remind myself, played the assistant managership in 24, and I can't remember what it worked out as overall. I think it was kind of like 11-12%, something like that. I think it was last week. So no, there's definitely a lot of people still sitting on the chip. We're not going to go into, just focus on what we're going to do, but hopefully try to give a good idea of kind of what the overall sort of landscape looks like. So obviously there's a lot of better work than what we could ever put together out there. James Planet FPL, definitely worth listening to his chip strategy pod, recent one, and Ben Quillen as well. But I mean, Sam, you've produced a lovely graphic which you did last year. How's the landscape looking, do you think, and how can you kind of describe what we're about to see as FPL managers?
Yeah, so I'll do my best. And as you correctly say, there's a lot better out there than us in describing this. But as a quick recap, we of course now know that there's a double game week in 25 for both Liverpool and Aston Villa. That gives Liverpool a double-double, which is quite nice for all of us who tripled up on Liverpool and those of us who went with Arne Slot last week, meaning that they don't need to use a transfer on their manager. Obviously, both of us are very likely to do so. Aston Villa doubling is good news for Rodgers owners, but there aren't that many of those. It's, I think, about 38% EO going into game week 24. So it's not crazy high ownership, but outside of him, I think most of them will be differential. Going a few weeks ahead up to game week 29, that's the next slightly different game week, that being a blank. We know that the Aston Villa Liverpool fixture has been brought forward to game week 25 because Liverpool are in the Carabao Cup final. So therefore that fixture can't be put in game week 29, giving them both a blank game week. So over the next 3 to 4 game weeks, you'll load up on your Liverpool, Aston Villa, and then if you're not free hitting, you want to get rid of them all, or as many as possible by the time you get to game week 29. Now, Newcastle and Crystal Palace are also meant to be blanking in game week 29. That is now about 98-99% likely based on the FA Cup draw, with both of them being given fairly reasonable ties that you'd expect at least one of them to get through for. And if they do, they can't then play their fixture in game week 29 either. So with that in mind, that's very likely a blank for Newcastle assets and Crystal Palace assets. But their game isn't going to be brought forward. It will be pushed back, and that will probably go to game week 33, which brings me on nicely to our next double game week, that being game week 33. At the moment, what I've put on graphic here is pure speculation because it's too many FA Cup results away from us knowing for sure. What I've put on the graphic from left to right is the 6 most likely teams to be getting a double game week in game week 33 as it stands. Aston Villa, Newcastle, Man City and Crystal Palace are the most likely because of the other permutations in the FA Cup, as well as Man United and Bournemouth are all also pretty likely. They play each other and are both relatively high chance of they play each other in game week 34 and both have a relatively high chance of one of them getting through to the semi-final. So with that in mind, game week 33 is going to be a fairly big double game week, but not crazy. It won't be like 10, 12, 14 teams. it will be a few teams, but it does look like a few of the bigger teams. What we do know, though, is that Liverpool, Liverpool, Spurs, Chelsea and Everton definitely won't be getting a blank game week in game week 34. Pretty much every other team is at least potentially able to get a blank. The teams that I've just described moving forward to game week 33 are the most likely ones to be blanking in game week 34. And therein lies the problem. Navigating between 33 and 34 is going to be quite difficult if you want to maximize the upside in either of those game weeks, because the teams that double, on the whole, I think barring Crystal Palace, are very likely to be the ones that then blank the following game week, which makes something like a free hit or a wild card much more powerful to navigate between those two game weeks. Later on in the season, very quick mention to game week 36 and 37. 36 is maybe I've been a bit harsh here. I've wrote down unlikely double. It's not necessarily massively unlikely. It's just less likely than 33, and it will probably be smaller than 33 based on current projections. I think the projections are suggesting that Newcastle versus Ipswich is the likely game that could get pushed back from 34 to 36, making that a double game week for those two teams. 37 is a pretty unlikely blank as well. That, again, is dependent on so many different things happening at this point that it's almost not worth mentioning. I think some Europa League finals need to be contested by Premier League teams for that to be even suggested as a blank. But it's one to just flag ahead of time that it is possible that we'll have a blank game week towards the end of the season in 37 as well. So, yeah, that's not a comprehensive analysis. Hopefully that makes sense. Any questions, send them my way.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of just describing what's in front of us. I suppose from the discussions that we've seen and heard so far, I think the two key points that I think we need to bear in mind right now are that, one, if your team allows it, and I know those people won't be in the situation, but if your team allows it, trying to run through 29 is probably quite sensible, just because that 34 blank is likely to be a bit more punitive, a bit bigger than 29 one. And you'd hope that you'd be able to, I suppose, barring maybe, having Isaac and Salah in your team, maneuver your way through that 29. Depends how much you load on Aston Villa now, which is something we need to talk about in a minute. And another kind of quick point as well, which is out there, Ben's made it, James has made it, is that you maybe in game week 30 should give second thought to hitting the wildcard button. So even though it's international break, and that's always the time that we really like to kind of hit go and spend a couple of weeks playing with your wildcard, tinkering around the edges, making those choices in the edge pieces, it probably isn't the best time, because we may not hear the doubles destinations until very late into 30, if not at all. We may not hear them until 31. So it might be an incredibly risky move to be playing your wildcard in 30, even though that does seem like a nice time, sort of, just on paper. So don't be expecting to spend that international break basically tinkering with a wildcard. So in some ways, I guess, Sam, we're kind of where we were. A few of the identities of some of the teams going forwards are now clear, especially with regards to the game at 29 blank, due to the fact that the double, the 25, is now notched into the calendar. And we've got that kind of clear short-term scenario of double game at 25 that we've got to kind of play with. But I suppose it's kind of not particularly right now changed much in terms of kind of what our kind of initial thoughts were last week in terms of our chip plans. So for me, it is still, as I said earlier on, a thought that probably should run through 29, probably will do that. Wildcard in that 31, if 30 is too risky. I mean, if there's like a situation where we find out doubles kind of, a couple of days before, and then I've got a team in place, I'm at 0.0, then sure, I'll do it then. But I won't be spending that international break kind of tinkering with a wild card. Maybe I'll be on FPL.team because, hey, I've got nothing better to do with my life. But I'll be looking to actually wild card in 31. Bench boost definitely suits 33. Free hit 34 because I've still got that, and ride it out to the end. That's my kind of scenario right now. But obviously that's kind of very specific to me. It does seem like, Sam, if you have played the system manager now, the triple captain can go in anywhere else. If 36, if there is a little double, I think the projection from James is that maybe there's Ipswich, Brentford and Newcastle in 36, and Chelsea and Ipswich for Newcastle in 36. So maybe that would be that would be when you play on Isaac, for example. But that kind of feels like the plan if you played your system manager now and everything else sort of runs. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but that looks like one that you could potentially be looking at, right?
Yeah, and I must admit, whilst you were describing there that your thinking hasn't changed, mine actually has in the last few days. I was going to look at free hitting going into game week 29, knowing that I really did want the Palace options. I wanted Newcastle. Obviously, I wanted to hold on to Liverpool and maybe load up on whoever was to double in game week 25. But the way the lay of the land has left us makes it maybe a little bit more clear in my particular situation that I'm actually not that heavily committed to the teams that are blanking in game week 29 right now. And I can, within maybe with one hit between now and then, get to a very strong, almost free hit-esque 11 in game week 29. It does mean that I have to forego players like Mateta and Munoz, which would be with a heavy heart because I really fancy them over the next few game weeks. And they've got great fixtures both before and after what would have been a free hit 29. But I think on balance, the power of going towards like a Haaland, a Foden with transfers, and then also having the free hit later on in the season just makes it that little bit too tempting. And it does change my transfer strategy over the next week as well, because if I was free hitting in game week 29, I'd probably load up a little bit more on Aston Villa. But because I've got only 3 transfers and the next 2 weeks, I'll be spending at least 1 transfer on moving my manager each time. It does give me limited maneuverability going into game week 29. So I do need to make sure that because I'm not looking to free hit now that game week, I need to have those transfers ready and waiting so I can almost restructure my side immediately in one game week rather than having to do it over several weeks. I need to kind of get it all done at once. I'm then also pretty comfortable with some of the teams that are playing and have good fixtures in game week 29 that I'd be attacking with transfers that I could then hold on to them in game week 30 as well. So Man City are a perfect example. Brighton at home in game week 29. Following that, game week 30 against Leicester almost seems too good to ignore as well. And then wildcarding after that makes a lot of sense. Although I have to admit, I think Man City might be staying on my wildcards, looking at the fixtures they've got and the fact that they're likely to double in game week 33 as well.
Yeah, them having the 29 game is very, very helpful. I do think that the question is inevitably going to rise fairly soon. How do I fit Haaland, who scored a very, very nice goal, actually. There was a bit of a wait, wasn't there, in the Champions League just now? But yeah, the very, very nice opening goal for City. Do look a lot better, City, now in 29. I think that's going to be a big factor. There'll be loads of perhaps less engaged managers hitting that free hit button. See a few blanks, just go for it. So he's going to come back into contention. And as you say, with that run, it kind of benefits both parties. If you're running through or if you're kind of free hit, it maybe benefits people who are running through a bit better because you're going to be having those players in for keeps. Like, I mentioned Guardiola a couple of weeks ago. Like, he's firmly on the list for coming in pretty soon. For me, one of those players that you can just comfortably hold for City. I think after kind of 29, it's basically clear water all the way to the end of the season for them. I think let's put just what we're going to do this week coming on ice, because there's definitely a few bits we're going to dig into. I think just kind of staying on the zoomed out place right now, let's have a look at kind of each chip quickly and just kind of discuss what is going on with each one and where we might be. There were a couple of questions that cropped up on socials that I'll just kind of throw in here as well, Sam. But I think let's start with assistant manager. So I mentioned obviously that a lot of people haven't actually played it. So 50% of the top 10K, 90% of the game. I reckon that kind of translates into for about 60% maybe of the engaged core haven't played the assistant manager at the moment. And I think maybe we'll talk about the possibilities for kind of what you're going to do if you're on Moyes in a little minute as well. But for now, game week 26, obviously there's a few people kind of eyeing up potentially just going for Slot or Emery, particularly if Trent does emerge as being kind of out or a doubt for the double coming up, and that might kind of grease some wheels towards perhaps moving Trent out and then getting Slot in. I mean, there's 26. There's lots of kind of different kind of scenarios, areas where you could be using that assistant manager. The reason we both went for it now, as discussed last week, was just because you had that double-double. So you had 5 games of the assistant manager. Is it too late to go in now? Or would you kind of be thinking, I'm going to hold my power, keep my powder dry and wait on for a little bit longer?
No, I'd be doing it now, almost certainly. Looking at the doubles ahead of us, it does look likely that one of either 33 or 36 will be a bigger double. The other one might be a smaller one or nothing at all. It looks more likely to be 33. We've had a question in the chat about the fairly likely 36 double. It's fairly likely at the moment, according to some projections, because it's an either or situation on a lot of those fixtures. It won't be both because there's only a limited number of fixtures that can go into either one. So it will be either a bigger one in 33 and therefore a much smaller one in 36, or vice versa. Right now, it looks more likely to be 33 than 36. Hopefully that makes sense. But what it does mean is that there's only one remaining big double game week left to come. And what that means is if you've got most of your chips left over, especially the bench boost is much more powerful in a bigger double game week. It's almost not useless, but it's much less powerful in a week where there's one extra fixture placed in, because you can only have 6 assets that have 2 games in that game week. So for example, if you bench boosted in game week 25, you can only have a maximum of 6 players across Liverpool, Aston Villa. So your bench is guaranteed to be single game weekers. Whereas if you do it in 33, you could have a full 15 of double game weekers ready to go on the bench boost, which means that the bench boost that week is much more powerful. It's not to say it can't work in other weeks. And if you've used it already or are planning to use it in a single game week, assistant manager could be used just as effectively in game week 33 instead. But because this is a smaller double game week right now, and a lot of triple captains have already kind of activated, it's, I think, in my opinion, a much better opportunity to be using it right now, where we've got a guarantee of a double game week for certain. We know assistant manager is more powerful with higher upside than any of the other chips across several game weeks. And if you've got a double game week guaranteed, you get the 4th fixture, which again gives you even better upside. Whereas later on in the season, if you're going to allocate bench boost to 33, then that leaves 36 probably, or vice versa, depending which way it falls. And that might not even be a double game week. We don't know that for certain. So it's kind of risky to then be pushing it down the line and then losing that extra fixture when you've got one right here, right now, that you can just place it on. So again, you might want to just run it through 3 single game weeks and attack table bonus each time, and that might work out really well. But the potential upside is it 25 or 33% higher if you get that extra game with the assistant manager. So play it in a guaranteed double game week. You've got 2 good opportunities there in Slot and Emery. Emery, if you want to go more Maverick, has the table bonus for the 2nd fixture. I think now is the time to play it. And I don't think it's too late just because you didn't play it last week.
No, definitely not. I suppose my only kind of one thought I kind of did have about if you wanted to leave the assistant manager. I mean, we did say previously it lends itself to 33 and 36, didn't we? And if that 36 double does kind of come to pass, you might kind of. There's 2 ways of looking at it, or 2 kind of possibilities. One is the non-table bonus assistant manager. One's a table bonus assistant manager. And I do think it is important potentially to have this sort of meat and potatoes part of the assistant manager to be in place. I mean, we've got lucky with Moyes, for example, and with Emery. If we went there next week, you'd be kind of thinking that the game against Ipswich is kind of the gimme. You're going to get your kind of your 10 points for winning that. And I think a lot of the time, yeah, okay, we do want the table bonus, and obviously that's great. But you've got to remember that that's the reason why that the bonus is in place for the most part, is that it's unlikely. So in some places, yeah, it may crop up a situation where you've got kind of a 3 or 4 game stretch where they're all table bonus, yeah. But you've got to remember that you could well be assistant managering into 1 or 2 points times 3 or 4 if you chase the table bonus every single time. I think it is worthwhile remembering that sometimes you do need that sort of, as I said, meat and potatoes of just getting those points on the board from your assistant manager. So something like, for example, game week 35, and I know there's double in 36, but a game week 35 and 36, pop it on Pep for Wolves at home, Southampton away. You know, just let the points roll in from what there could be loads of goals. You know, that could be kind of, you know, 11, 12, 13 points times 2, so that's 26, and then go for your table bonus with the 3rd one. Something like that could be, if you're kind of scrabbling around. I think the West Ham that week, for example, had Nottingham Forest at home. That could be your kind of your table bonus chase for that particular week. But I think kind of what's emerged a little bit from kind of just thinking about how it's being used at the moment, what it looks like. As you said earlier on, if you've got Slot as your assistant manager now, you're leaving him on there. So you've not really gone the table bonus at any point. But feasibly, you could end up with 40 points out of slot, right? So, I mean, that's not something to be sniffed at, really. I know it's kind of sexy and obviously really alluring to look at table bonus sometimes, but I think it's good to have that sort of mix, perhaps on paper sure things and maybe one punt in there. If you can get it across double, great. But in the example that I gave, for example, maybe you would be kind of looking at Howe for Chelsea and Ipswich just to get that extra game in. But I think playing it like that with having a bit of a mix in how you approach it, I think is probably a good idea, just to make sure you're not, unless you're really shooting for the moon, just to make sure you're not kind of getting kind of lured in by that table bonus and coming out with kind of, not very much to show for it, I guess.
Yeah, it's risk reward at the end of the day. And the reason that I initially really liked the idea of using the assistant manager across 36 through to 38 is, one, at the time it looked much more guaranteed or likely that there would be a 36 double. Now it's less likely, so it might not even happen, which again is kind of the point I'm making here. And it also means that by that point in the season, I know how much risk I want to take to chase rank. I might want just 3 game weeks worth of meat and potatoes, like you say, no risk or lower risk, going for teams that I back to win, and more often than not. Or I might be chasing and I might be 200-300k back, and I might want to just throw my chips on some really wild punts that can get me the table bonus in every single one, or a balance between the two. But one thing is for certain here, the assistant manager is more powerful no matter what chip strategy, no matter what aversion to or the sense of risk you want to apply here. It's always more powerful if you get more games out of it, no matter what. You might want to play it safe for those 3 game weeks, but it's more powerful if you have 4 games in those 3 game weeks. So go after the double game weeks with the assistant manager, if at all possible. The only thing that's putting me off using it later in 36 right now is the fact that we don't know for sure that there is even going to be a double game week in 36. So you might be playing it across just 3 matches. And even if you wanted to go for the safe picks, the upside is then 10 to 12 points lower, because you've only got 1 less game than anyone else playing it in game week 25 through to 27. And you can play it on the safe picks in these 3 weeks as well. There's nothing stopping you.
Yeah, no, definitely. We'll talk about that in just a minute, actually. You said earlier on that you play the assistant manager now. I'd actually, if I have a triple captain, be playing it now. I know you can't, because obviously your assistant manager's active. But if you had a triple captain, I kind of would be looking at playing it on Salah right now over playing the assistant manager and hoping that a better opportunity would come up later. Just because that Wolves game just looks like it could be gangbusters for Salah. And then with Aston Villa at the moment, the defence is the walking wounded, right? You've got Konsa, don't know what's going on with him. You've got Powell out. You've got Mings, I think, coming back to fitness after having the knee. You've got, I think it's Dizazi is basically looking like kind of their main defender right now. That's quite worrying. And obviously, you know that the Ipswich, the Villa defence is hardly Fort Knox. They always seem to concede at least 1 or 2, and they do give up a lot of chances. On paper, their defense is pretty good, and I think in the underlying data, if I remember correctly, they're actually doing okay. But it's one of those things that kind of they seem to be unable to keep a clean sheet. And I just think with Wolves, and obviously, the opportunity for this week has obviously happened. You've obviously got those points from on the board from Salah already with the brace against Bournemouth. But I do think with this pair of fixtures now, if I was choosing between, am I going to play the assistant manager or am I going to play a triple captain? I would be very tempted actually to lean towards triple captain this week, if that's the kind of the question in front of you. But I mean, you've got that, and then you've got kind of that 36 as well, Sam. If you've got your assistant manager active, right? I think those two are the 2 probable double sort of options, and then you've got all the singlers that we spoke about last week.
Yeah, I guess the question you want to ask yourself if you're tempted to triple captain Salah this game week is more to do with, is triple captaining Salah this week worth losing a game on an assistant manager later on in the season? Because there's a possibility that you might not get 4 games out of your assistant manager later on in the season if you do it. You might, and it might be fine, but we can't guarantee that at this point. Whereas if you do it now, you can guarantee yourself the 4 fixtures. You will definitely get that 1 extra game. With Salah, okay, granted, later on in the season, you might have to play it in a single game week. There is that possibility. Obviously, there's the outside possibility of being able to use it in 36 double, just the same way as there is for triple cap with the assistant manager. But you've also got low-hanging fruit like the Southampton game for Salah. You've got Leicester, you've got Haaland and Palmer, who've both got great fixtures in single game weeks as well. And we all know from seasons gone past that the triple captain is, well, on balance anyway. There are obviously exceptions, and Andy Martin can attest to this. That it is a limited upside chip, whereas the assistant manager, if used correctly, can have much greater upside, even from getting that one extra fixture out of it. So for me, I wouldn't be using Salah triple captain this game week because I wouldn't want to risk losing an extra game. But I do understand the logic if you want to play the fixture angle and you want to be attacking the Wolves and Villa, because Villa are depleted, Wolves are pretty poor. So makes sense. But just know if you're going to do that, you can't guarantee yourself that fourth fixture for your assistant manager later on in the season. And that might be something you're willing to do. That might be absolutely fine, but there is a bit of a mathematical equation to weigh up there on whether you think the upside on Salah's extra game this week outweighs the downside of potentially losing a fixture later on in the season for an assistant manager.
Yeah, that's it. It's whether, so Salah against Bournemouth got a brace 16 points. I mean, that's probably better than most assistant managers are going to get on balance. And if you get lucky with a table bonus, then sure. But Salah looks like he's one of those players who you've got a decent, you can feel fairly comfortable that you're going to get a return of some sort, if not two. A goal and assist, obviously, by Salah is like death and taxes, so two kind of most notable things in life. So I just wonder whether that could be something that will cross your mind a little bit. That's all. But I completely understand what you're saying as well with regards to losing the extra fixture. It's just whether Salah within those two games is going to do better than the system will in the extra game later on in the year. And then maybe you can find a way, as I said earlier, of straddling the double in 36. If that does happen, it may not, and that's the gamble to make it all work for you. And it might be in that case that you end up chasing the table bonus a little bit more with the assistant manager. So yeah, triple captain, I guess, Sam, for you, sounds like it's either going to be in 36 if Isaac potentially gets that double, or you'll be looking at one of those single game weeks, like I did way back in game week 6 or 7 when it all went wrong for me versus Southampton for Haaland.
Yeah, completely. And look, with triple captain, with any of this, there's always risk attached. You can never get a guaranteed return. But Salah, Haaland, and Palmer have all got some great fixtures to come in single game weeks. And there's obviously the chance that Isaac could get the double in 36 as well. So I think, honestly, I hate to say it because we're quite a data-driven pod, I'm probably going to play it on vibes at the time. Like if I get a gut feeling one week and it doesn't look likely that Isak's going to get that double in 36 for whatever reason, let's say they get knocked out of the cup in the next round, then obviously I can't rely on another extra spare double game week. I'm going to have to play it on a single. And at that point, I will lean more into just how I feel about it. And if there's a captain one week that I'm just like, you know what, it's just so obvious. Salah, Southampton, come on. I mean, I said earlier on in the season, I was very hesitant to play Haaland triple captain against Southampton. Obviously, it didn't work out as well as it could have, but his data was incredible. He was very unlucky not to get something massive. And look, I mean, it can work out in a single game week pretty well. And the difference between an assistant manager in a single game week like that and a triple captain is the triple captain has no limit on the upside, whereas the assistant manager, the upside is each goal that you score, and barring a 9-0, which of course Southampton are liable to, it's fairly limited on what the potential upside is, whereas Salah could get 4 or 5 returns potentially and get something completely ridiculous. So I'm more comfortable playing Salah, or I'm playing the triple captain in a single than I would be to run through 3 game weeks in a row of just assistant manager in single game weeks.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. All right, so the other 3 chips are more speculative, I'd say, and depend a lot on how things are going to fall. Let's start with the bench boost. So FPL Gil epitomized the question somehow about this. He asked us on Blue Sky. Says, I'm trying to decide whether to bench boost in this week coming. They've got, I should say, Flecken, Robinson, Milenkovic and Isaac sat on their bench, which is obviously looking quite good, depending on Flecken's fitness, if everyone's fit. or follow the pack and wild card into a bench boost and they double, meaning 33. They continued. The accepted wisdom seems to be that bench boosting into double game week is best in 33. This seems obvious if you have 12 double game weekers as you're gaining extra fixtures, and then if you have some single game weekers, you can sprinkle them in too. So I don't know. Obviously, if your bench does look quite good in one of these weeks coming up, it may be that you may be thinking about it. I've seen kind of a few kind of bench dilemmas even this week, where people are kind of saying, "Well, I've got Rodgers, I can't be benching him, right? So does it mean that I've got to bench a Bumo, a Wood, something like that?" And if you do have a decent bench, maybe you're sat there with Mr. Valdemarson, and he's still playing because Flecken's injured, so you've got your goalkeeper playing, and then you've got, I don't know, a couple of okay looking defenders. Maybe you've got a Mikalenko, and then I don't know who else you might have. Maybe Robinson versus Nottingham Forest at home. Maybe then you'd be looking at it and thinking, well, this is actually a really decent bench. I can't play any of these players. Maybe I just bench boost now. I don't know, Sam. It's if you're in that situation, you've really got to be thinking about it. For me, with my current setup, it's pretty clear that it's going to have to be the more orthodox, the accepted wisdom is what I'm going to follow, really, to optimize my team with a wild card. But can you see maybe there's a scenario where people might be bench boosting in a single game week, like the week just to come, if you've got a stacked bench like FPL Guild does?
Yeah, I can actually. And I think with a bench boost, it's quite a unique situation to be in, because if you have got a strong bench in a single game week and you've got all your other chips remaining, so you've still got your assistant manager, you've still got your triple captain, we know for sure that there's limited double game weeks remaining. And again, you might want to attack those double game weeks with other chips. So assistant manager, like I mentioned, you can guarantee yourself a double in game week 33 there, or triple captain as well if you've got that remaining. So if you, through serendipity have got like a good bench in the next week or next 2-3 weeks, then fine, absolutely. And then when you wildcard later on down the line, the secondary benefit is, whilst everyone else is spreading their budget across a 15, you can just have the best 11 players you could ever want, and you've got limited game weeks to have a strong bench for. You can just pile it all into your first 11, maybe have one decent 12th man just in case, but the rest can all be all of your money pushed into the best possible 11 that you want. You won't have the full 15 for double game week 33, but you could have a different chip active and get benefit there. You can then also have a stronger 11 than the rest of the pack, or get there without as many free transfers for 35, 36, 37, 38. And that gives you another leg up. So I do quite like that as an option, but it is very situation dependent. You've got to make sure that the upside is definitely there. And in that case, I think he said Isak's on the bench. It could be quite a canny move, really. It just depends which chips he's also got left, really.
Yeah, it's so situational, but there's definitely a case. If you can make it in your own particular team, I'd ignore what the mainstream are doing if it does suit your team to bench boost. And in some ways as well, that optimizes your wild card going forward. It has that knock-on effect because you can just focus on the 11, or 12, I guess, rather than kind of what we're going to have to do, identify those kind of horrible edge pieces, which are 4.2, 4.3, and try to fit those guys in, rather than you can just go for broke really and have that freemium team without many worries about how it's going to look when you do come to bench boost. Throw in Palmer, Salah, and Haaland, and just forget about your bench apart from your 12th man. I mean, that's the ideal situation to be in. In some ways, I'm quite envious of somebody who can hit that bench boost a tiny bit early potentially this week. But I do think the bench boost does seem to fit in 33. There is a kind of a follow-on from that. So Paul Jones in the chat said, is free hit 33 a play? Do you think? As easier to get on Haaland for the potential double, and Man City players are expensive. Maybe that could suit somebody who's used a wild card already, and don't have that many transfers for whatever reason, and trying to manipulate a way around it. There's definitely kind of some scope to kind of just free hit into 11 doublers, effectively just maximizing that particular game week. Problem is obviously what you can do in 34. How have you worked it out? Are you working out that you've got a good team for 32? You've got a team that comes out of 33 that looks good that you come back to in 34. There's definitely, I guess, applications and ways to use the free hit aggressively. We both did it last year to varying effects. I think I had I think the difference was that I had Diogo Jota's 12-pointer from one game, whereas you didn't, and that meant that your free hit was kind of a grey arrow, and mine was an okay green. But sometimes it can be very useful to use that free hit aggressively and go against the grain, right? It just looks like if you are in the situation that we are in, and probably about kind of 30-40% of the people out there are in, that free hitting in that 34 and running through 29 probably does look the play right now, and using that free hit this year, regrettably, a tiny bit more defensively than we'd otherwise like.
Yeah, and I think the main thing here for Paul and anyone else considering this is, which team do you prefer in the weeks outside of the free hit? Do you prefer having a team loaded up, looking at the fixtures of your City, your Villa, Newcastle, Crystal Palace, maybe Man United, Bournemouth? Or do you prefer the other side of the coin, which is more loaded up on your Liverpool? I can't remember, is it Spurs that also? No, there's another team that for sure can't. Oh, no, it is Spurs. It's Spurs, Chelsea, Everton already that won't be blanking game week 34, but they also won't be doubling in 33. So do you prefer your
Arsenal as well, right?
Arsenal potentially? We don't know that yet. If Crystal Palace get knocked out before the semi-finals.
Yeah, Liverpool too, 34.
Yeah, that's what I said. Liverpool. Yeah,
you said Liverpool.
Yeah, Liverpool, Spurs, Chelsea, Everton confirmed. And then outside of that, there's a few with one team left in the tie that will probably also come out at that point. But whatever happens when we get there, it will depend on which team you prefer in the weeks around those two game weeks, 33 and 34. I personally want to wildcard, as it stands anyway, into a team more leaning towards what would be my natural doublers in 33. So I want Man City assets outside of 33. I probably also want Newcastle, Crystal Palace potentially, possibly even Bournemouth as well. And there might be a few others scattered in there because they've also all got good fixtures around 33. But then we'll be blanking in 34. So I do like the aggressive free hit strategy for 33, but it only really works if you like your team in 32 and 34 without needing to use a whole roster of free transfers to cover the blank. I guess the other problem is, where are you going to put the bench boost in that case if you haven't used it already? If you're using the free hit that week, you can't use a bench boost defensively to cover off a blank. And free hit's really the only one that you can do in a blank to maximize upside. So I'd just be maybe a little bit cautious of where you'd place the other chips to maximize the potential upside, even if in isolation, the free hit also does maximize upside in 33. The other chips are much less potent and powerful in the single game weeks too, or in the blanks.
Yeah, for sure. The only thing which is kind of maybe a bit of a spanner in the works for some. So say you're sat there with Mateta, Munoz, Isaac, Hall, Gordon, triple Liverpool, and you've got, I don't know, Rodgers, and you've kind of gone in on Watkins or something like that. You're planning to go in on Watkins later on, and you kind of ended up with a really sort of 29 unfriendly team. When you get to 29, or depending on obviously how many transfers you got, so it starts to become a little bit more niche, but you kind of follow my drift here. There could be you could get 29 and think, oh, I probably need to free hit here, because otherwise I'm going to end up with 6 or 7 players and really lose ground on the pack. That might be quite a tricky situation to go into, especially if you've got the 34 in mind. So I think there's definitely some scope to look at 29. There's going to be some people who just think, you know what, sod it. People are going to be holding Salah, people are going to be holding Isaac because they know they're going to want them in future. So I'm going to take this opportunity to free hit and get rid of the Palmer, potentially who's got Arsenal, get rid of Salah for sure, load up on City, load up on United. Really? Yeah, apparently that's what people are doing, planning to do. But there will be some people who want to use that free hit, quote unquote, aggressively in that particular blank, which looks that looks the aggressive use of the free hit potentially, shall we say? 33, the most aggressive; 29, slightly more aggressive; 34, defensive. There may be some people who do that, and that will become a little bit more tricky, I guess, for some too. Maybe the wild card could be a way around one of them, Sam, because that's kind of the final chip to discuss. So if you are going to wild card in, wild card around the 30s, surely it does make sense, as Gil said earlier on, the accepted wisdom to go for 31 or 32. But maybe you could, I don't know, wild card free hit in 33, wild card in 34. There's potentially a world where that could work, where you get 9 or 10 in that week, but it does start to get very, very intricate, doesn't it?
It does. And honestly, it's not even the craziest thing to suggest. You could even look at wildcarding in 29 if you were really up a creek in terms of all of the players you've got blanking that week. You could wildcard into 29, maybe not even exposing yourself to a full 15 of playing players. You can maybe have a Salah hidden on the bench or an Isak or something if you wanted to keep them through 30 and onwards. It might not be crazy if you don't want to use all of your transfers up and maybe you're too far away. Even 5 free transfers wouldn't get you covered for 29. But I also don't mind the free hit in 29 either. I think if I had any more Villa coverage or Crystal Palace coverage, I'd be much more tempted to free hit in 29 and then maybe, like you said, do something clever around wildcarding and bench boosting simultaneously. So probably trying to use free transfers to get me to 33, and I would start loading up on players more likely to get 33 doubles from this point, and free hit 29, go to 33 where I effectively bench boost and dead end all at the same time and wildcard out of it into the blank. One interesting quirk that I'll just quickly highlight between 33 and 34 as well, by the way, Liverpool already will have single game weeks in both of those weeks, but their fixtures, even though they're singles, Leicester and Spurs. So 2 really good game weeks for attacking returns there potentially, that most of us, or at least a lot of us, will maybe not have too much Liverpool coverage there because they only have a single game week in 33. But you might easily get more out of them than a lot of our doublers who, okay, they have double game weeks, but there's not really one team with an amazing set of double game weeks there. So maybe just don't attack 33 quite as much, and it helps you survive 34 as well. If you've got a couple of Liverpool in there, maybe Arsenal and Crystal Palace come out of 34 as well, and then Crystal Palace will have a double 33, then play in 34. Arsenal will have singles in both, and I'm pretty sure their 2 fixtures aren't too bad either across those 2. So maybe the plan is there, free hit 29, wild card maybe before, but then don't attack the double game week 33 bench boost with a full roster of doublers, have a few singlers in there as well that helps you survive 34 too.
Yeah. I think there's so many ways you could possibly play it, which I'm quite happy about by the looks of it. Honestly, I do think wildcard 31 for me is 32 or maybe even 30, somewhere around there is a bit of a lock, really, because I'd like to leave it as late as possible because I will be spaffing my free transfers in 29 to cover up for that blank. I think there's no kind of way around that. So hopefully I'll be able to roll up a few more free transfers to cover a few bits and pieces. If I go in 30, that'd be obviously if I have to, then I have to. But it'd be nice to hold it until 32, have, I don't know, max information on player availability. We'll know the fixtures by then, but player availability. It's nice that the big double's not at the end of the season now. So there's still kind of a decent amount of X motivation and all that sort of jazz if you do care about that. And also you'd have some kind of idea, I guess, on player scheduling as well. So I know there's kind of FA Cup finals and things coming up, semi-finals coming up for that blank, which is semis or quarters. I think it's the quarters, isn't it? Which is likely to kind of be something that people need to kind of bear in mind, I guess. So finally on this, still decisive for the end of the season. There's kind of a question that's kind of come up. I know that people have kind of ventured out there that, hey, everybody's going to be on the same sort of strategy that I mentioned earlier on, run through 29, wildcard in 31-ish, bench boost in 33, free hit 34, if you're assistant manager now. The only kind of rejoinder to that for me would be, I'd say there's a bit of a split now, actually, because I know a lot of voices, bigger voices out there in the world, not including us in there actually, and have played their assistant manager now. But as I said earlier on, not everybody has. There's definitely going to be other people who are going to be playing things in a slightly different way. Sam's just mentioned and given voice to, and I've kind of tried to blunder my way through giving voice to a few different ways that you could potentially kind of take on this upcoming period. So there's definitely going to be differences within which gains are to be had, or indeed losses are to be had. I'm a bit sad though that if I'm following that particular strategy, that all chips are going to be over by game week 34, and I've still got 4 game weeks of the season to go, where I'm probably going to be taking ludicrous punts, because let's face it, I'll be around kind of 150k by game week 35, and just hoping that I can lock into top 100k by game week 38 like last season. But yeah, I'm broadly kind of still enthusiastic about this period. I do think that it may look like from socials that everybody's used assistant manager now, but I don't know. It doesn't feel that way to me if you look at the raw data.
Yeah, and also usually the ones on social who are scoring higher tend to be the louder ones during any given game week, and the ones with the higher scores will be the ones with the extra player manager. So I wouldn't be too disheartened. Obviously there's quite a lot active, but it's not crazy levels. And anyone with the assistant manager up their sleeve still, you've got a very powerful chip that you can use later on in the season, or even starting this game week as well. So definitely don't be disheartened. There's plenty of gains to be made with the chips at our disposal and double game weeks to come too. So play it your way. Try and find a strategy that works for your team best. Don't just copy what we both seem to be happening to do at the moment, but it is a popular strategy, I guess, because a lot of us are set up in a fairly similar way, but there are definitely edges to be gained and carved out over the next few game weeks. So don't lose heart yet. There's plenty left to play for.
Exactly. Okay. All right. Let's move on to looking squarely at that double game week 25 to come. This week, I think we're going to combine the knee-jerk and best transfers just to try to preview game week 25 in one go. In the knee-jerk, let's talk assistant managers from a few different perspectives. So Slot versus Emery, those are the two. Slot has Wolves and Aston Villa, and Emery has Ipswich and Liverpool. I don't know. So there's a few people who are obviously looking to go in fresh, and there's obviously people who are on Moyes at the moment, like you and I, who are looking to probably move him on, almost definitely move him on. FPL Vino de Flo, good name, said, "Hey guys, he's just coming off, or they're coming off their TC, heavily contemplating assistant manager double game at 25. Really interested in the ownership on Slot versus Emery and the potential upside of the latter versus shielding with the former. So upside of going with Emery, that table bonus against Liverpool in the second game versus shielding with Slot. Any data and insights are much obliged." I think that's an interesting kind of start point here, Sam. So if you are going in fresh, I know this won't be for a lot of people, but there, as I said, the majority of people haven't played with assistant manager, and it's going to be an interesting juncture for a lot of people. We'll talk about whether you do swap to one from Moyes in the second. I mean, I think that's really interesting because it really does come down to that, whether you go sword or shield with this. Like in some ways, Slot is the potential, given how Liverpool have been going on, guarantor of a 20-point assistant manager starting from that double. I mean, that's great. It's just that there's obviously that delicious potential upside for Emery, and both have very winnable first games on the table. That you'd be maybe Moyes got us 12 points from a 4-0, and you'd be expecting around that maybe from the Wolves and Ipswich games that are on the table. It's just which one you go for if you're going in fresh. I mean, that's a very interesting question, just because I think that maybe the guarantor of Slot would be a bit alluring for people when you're using a big chip like this.
Yeah, so it's a loaded question. I think in a straight head-to-head, if there was no upper limit on how many players you can have alongside your assistant manager from one team, then I think Slot very slightly edges it. No matter how you play, I think he's ahead on the expected points on most of the different analytical sites. It is very close, and obviously he's more of a steady Eddie, won't get the table bonus. The upside is more limited, but I think 7 or 8 out of 10 times he probably just marginally gets ahead of Emery. But crucially, it's not just a straight head-to-head with these two. It's also about the other players from these teams that you want. With Slot, there are 3 other players, potentially 4 or 5 other Liverpool players that you could very feasibly want in your team this week. Obviously, the most popular 3 right now are Salah, Trent and Gakpo. Trent is training. He might well be back by game week 25. I think he probably will be. But even if he's not, you've got people like Szoboszlai, you've got Jota, you've got Konate, you've got Van Dijk, Alisson even. There are lots of other good options there that you can feasibly actually buy this week and be perfectly happy with, rather than going for Slot and still expect a relatively decent points tally from. With Aston Villa, I'm not so sure there is. And I've been racking my brains because I've got no coverage at the moment as to how deep I want to go on Villa. And outside of Emery, there's Rodgers, which again, very happy with him. He should do pretty well. The minutes are great. But I've not got any faith whatsoever in players like Rashford, Asensio, Marlon yet, because we just simply don't know how they're going to shape up. Once we know which ones of them are locked into the starting 11, they become much more secure picks. But right now, not feeling that comfortable. Watkins is an injury doubt. If he wasn't, that might change things. But there's no way I'm going anywhere near any of their back line. They've kept, 3 clean sheets all season, pretty much, something like that. 2 in the last 10. The data's not bad, but they do leak goals, and they've got Liverpool as part of the double. So, and after that, the fixtures aren't great either. So Emery, for me, is a much more tempting proposition to go for from the off, because you can also have triple Liverpool alongside him. And there's not many Aston Villa players you're missing out on if you go for Emery. You're not going to realistically pad up on 3 other Aston Villa players outside of Emery. So given the fact that the first fixture is Ipswich at home and you've got the table bonus potential, meaning he's actually not that far behind Slot in terms of the overall mean of the points that they might tally over, like, let's say 100 attempts at this exact double game week, I think I prefer Emery, and he's cheaper as well, so you can do more with that 0.8 elsewhere too. So yeah, Emery for me marginally, mainly because of what else you can get from Liverpool.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the way you go about it. I mean, I think to bring in people who are looking to move on from Moyes, a lot of that actually does hinge on one player's availability. I mean, if you've got Konaté, you've got Alisson, obviously, and that's part of your triple up for Liverpool. You're going to Emery, and if you're looking to assistant manager now, you're going to Emery. But we both own Trent, and Trent's availability and my assessment thereof, because I doubt we'll get a clear answer, I think is really important here. We might tomorrow. So if he's not on the bench for Merseyside derby, I'm pretty clear that he probably won't play both games in the double game week. If he is, then maybe that gets a little bit more hairy. But if Trent isn't looking like he's going to play 2 out of 2 in double game week 25, which one might argue actually is already the case. Maybe we're looking at it and thinking, I don't know. We'll find out definitely more tomorrow or today if you listen to this on Wednesday. Then I'd be pretty tempted to take him out for another defender. Kirkes for me is my key target, and with my defence in disarray, and get Slot. If Trent is fit, then I think that you just get Emery and hope he pulls off the masterclass versus Liverpool, despite the fact that their defence is decimated. I'll still on the Villa point, and we'll talk about this in our teams later on. Probably get Kirkes actually as no Villa defender, as you said, is worth anyone's time. But I think that's kind of perhaps what it hinges on for me a little bit. In fact, there is an argument, because they do blank in 29, that maybe Slot's 20-pointer, if you're kind of anticipating that that's probably what's going to happen because of the Liverpool machine at the moment, the big red machine. Maybe you might think, you know what, maybe the ceiling for Slot of being around 20 is a bit bigger than what Trent's going to get, because we're not sure whether he's fit enough to play both of those games. So maybe you take the gamble that, hey, you know what, I'm taking out a player who's got a blank in 29 for a player who's going to play in 29, save myself a transfer going forward. Plus, I've still retained my kind of triple Liverpool for a good looking double. So there's definitely quite a lot on the table for that one. If you're coming off Moyes, Sam, which you are, I assume that it's the same case for you, that it's all about Trent's availability, really, in terms of dictating which way you're going to go.
Yeah, it is for sure, because I, like you, if Trent is out of game week 25, or at least the first game, I think I would also try to seize that opportunity to bring in a player that is going to play in game week 29. I, again, like you, would probably go for Kirkes, because I do really like him. If I was free hitting still in 29, I'd probably go for Munoz, but because of what we've already discussed, I think Kirkes makes much more sense for me. But what I would say is that would be with a heavy heart. I'd prefer Trent to be available, because at the end of the day, it's not just one free transfer to move across to Slot, it's 2. And then I've also got to weigh that into how many free transfers I've got to play with ahead of game week 29. Obviously, I've got to Kirkes, which is great, but I've lost 2 free transfers in making those maneuvers. So I need to kind of plan that out over the next few game weeks to make sure that I'm not giving myself a -8 or a -4 down the line, to make sure I've got a good team in game week 29. But yeah, if Trent's out, it's the reasons you've given are the same as mine. I would probably do the same as you. I'd make sure I've still got triple Liverpool coverage, take the opportunity of going for Slot, because it means that it's not an extra player that I then need to take out down the line. And of course, he has been fantastic. He's a steady Eddie pick with marginally better expected points than Emery. But I prefer the trajectory we're currently on, where we're in a universe that Trent is fit, will start both games, and therefore I can go for Emery and move away from Trent closer to free hit, closer to non-free hit 29.
Yeah, I don't know. I could be tempted to kind of just take the bait, take the gamble that he's not going to play both games, and that Conor Bradley will play one of them if Trent's not fit enough. But I mean, so much to find out tomorrow, and obviously going on the free transfers point. Obviously, important to remember that whichever manager you get, you're likely to be moving off them immediately afterwards in game of 26. So bear in mind that you've probably, well, it doesn't cost you a free transfer to activate, but you've got one free transfer already kind of bound up, and you're probably unlikely to keep the same manager across 26 to 27 if you're activating now. So that's 2 free transfers you bound up. So yeah, chiming with Sam's point, just make sure that you've got a plan if you're planning to run through in 29, depending on which one you go for. But yeah, I think both are pretty decent. You're just hoping for an Emery masterclass effectively, but if you're looking for kind of the more safe option, it's going to be Slot. That brings us on to players a little bit better. So best transfers this week. Normally I give a rundown of what's kind of going on in the fantasy world. I think that maybe this time it's worth just discussing whether you go short or long term here. So you've already kind of just touched on it. Going for a Villa mid or going for Watkins, indeed, are things which are obviously on people's minds. I note that Watkins isn't in the top 5 players transferred in because obviously of the injury, but Morgan Rogers is. So he's been brought in for 132,000. People looking to shift, predominantly Gordon, who did have a problem, didn't play in the FA Cup. 270,000 transfers out for him. Likes of a Mad as well being moved on for Gordon. For Rogers. Mad does have the game in 29, and it's quite a good one as well. Actually, against Leicester away. So I don't know. For me, it becomes a bit of a transfers game, really, here. Whether you go for the Villa mids, go for double game week, or you funnel towards players who are more blank game week 29 friendly with the good fixtures, e.g. Bournemouth or Brentford, or indeed, as you mentioned with Munoz and Mateta, whether you just sack that all off entirely and go for a Mateta or go for a Munoz and think, screw it, I'll figure it all out later on, or indeed you've got a plan in place. Yeah, I think a lot of it is due to free transfers and where you're sat on this one, because you've got 3 free transfers, I remember, whereas I've only got the 1. And I'm going to have to use one to move the manager on. And it's what I do with that kind of hit. And then, I don't know, for me, I think I'm going to be going down the kind of the Bournemouth route, as kind of mentioned, get Kirkes probably. The issue for me with on free transfer is that any further movement screws up 29 Villa-wise. So if I took out Ahmad, who does have a game 29, for Rogers, who's obviously got double now, I'm basically spending 2 transfers on that player, which means they come at that sort of premium of being a hit or kind of 2 free transfers. And the opportunity cost is I'd lose a lot of flex down the line. And it feels to me that I wish I still own Rogers, and it's kind of a case of what you have, you hold. But I'm not too sure about buying fresh is my situation with the minimal freeze. So I don't know, if you do have 1 free transfer and you're kind of thinking, do I get a Rogers? Do I get a Clivert? I don't know, or a Semenyo indeed. I'd maybe be inching towards going for a Bournemouth player or a Bumo or something like that with a good run now. And also having that fixture in 29. That feels better to me if you've got minimal free transfers. But if you do have a bit more leeway like you, Sam, it does feel like there's more of a debate to be had around bringing in a Rogers, right?
Yeah, for sure. And even with 3 free transfers, obviously I prefer to have more, everyone would, but I still don't know if it's enough for me to want to go for Rogers. I'm right on the edge of it because I've got the exact money to do Moyes to Emery and Ahmad to Rogers. But like you said, even though Ahmad's been a little bit disappointing the last few games, it's not too long ago he was scoring a hat-trick and has, generally speaking, looked pretty decent as an actual player recently. And he's got a good fixture run, including a great fixture in game week 29. So I'm not sure if using 1 free transfer to move away from him this week to get Rogers, who I then need to transfer back out later. So the second free transfer, especially when I've got to use 2 free transfers in the next 2 weeks on managers as well. That leaves me pretty tight on transfers going into game week 29 unless I wanted to free hit. So I've kind of annoyingly made peace because I'm going to have to find a sofa to hide behind because Rogers against Ipswich could absolutely go off. And even against Liverpool, he could do very well as well. So he is a player I'm going to be very jealous of this week. I really wish I had him. And the annoying thing here is that I can have him, but I'm not sure whether it's worth the extra 2 free transfers that I'm going to burn, and therefore potentially even as much of as a -8 down the line to get to a team that I really want in game week 29, and potentially trade a guaranteed 0-pointer for someone with much higher upside than 4 points going into game week 29 itself. So I think for me, I'm probably just going to go with Emery and not Rodgers, but it is going to be with a heavy heart, and I really wish I had him this week in particular.
Yeah, I think it's a case of weighing up the short term versus the long term, isn't it? And it's incredibly difficult. I could do a mad to Rodgers. I could do that, and it's just what that means for my 29 as well. Like you come to this pod because I guess you like to have longer view and all that sort of thing. And look at my 29, I can get to 11 men with 3 free transfers without any hits. I could take a hit this week, because that kind of is necessary, and I think it could be nicely shielded through the Southampton game. But other than that, I don't need to bother with it. I don't need to kind of take that many hits or any hits at all, depending on the kind of player fitness and things like that. Yeah, it's a difficult one to weigh up. It really is. And if you look at the transfers in, as I mentioned, Rodgers being brought in by quite a lot. You're probably going to have to deal with the twin force of Rodgers, get another sofa Sam, get on DFS, because Chris Wood has also been brought in by 250,000 managers who have finally seen enough. I expect there's probably a lot of people who sold him after Bournemouth and are buying him back after Brighton, to be fair. Mr. Kirkes is actually third for transfer at the moment, rose to 5.0, and Boomer's been brought in. On the other side, Lewis Hall is being sold quite a lot, which is an interesting one. I can see why people are doing it. Problem is that Newcastle are likely to have a lot of games towards the end of the season. And if you bought him in cheap, like I did at 4.4, I'm not sure I want to be selling him because he's going to probably be okay. Same with Isaac, and people selling him for presumably Watkins. I don't know, 118,000 sales for him, and Trent being sold by 110,000. Yeah, I mean, I think broadly, it's obviously not the sexiest thing in the world to say, but I think broadly we're both kind of looking at a long-term investment rather than a short-term looking to spike variance here. But I think what's important to note, Sam, I don't know if you agree, but what's important to note is that either play is completely viable. It just depends, such as the magic of the free transfer rolling rule that was introduced this season, that a lot of it depends on the situation that you're in with the free transfer you got in the bank. But broadly, don't have that many. Maybe look at long-term. If you have a few more, you can probably take a short-term punt, right?
Yeah. And it all depends on whether you want a free hit in 29 as well. If you're already like most of the way there, you've got loads of Palace, loads of Villa, loads of Newcastle, all of that good stuff, then maybe it just makes sense to just go even further and just load up on Villa as well as much as you can and really attack the double game week, knowing that you don't necessarily need to get rid of them in a hurry for game week 29. But I think given the side of the fence we've both fallen on, with probably wanting to run through 29, it makes more sense to tread a little bit more lightly when it comes to Villa assets, especially given the fixtures after this week aren't amazing. So yeah, sofa required on Rodgers, I think.
I think the only other kind of, we've touched on them already, Crystal Palace is one that kind of is a really interesting situation just to think about, because I know they've got the blank in 29, but either side that blank, Ipswich at home in 28, Southampton away in game week 30, plus 3 fairly winnable games, Everton at home first, then Fulham away, Aston Villa at home in 27. Villa's minds more than likely are going to be elsewhere, let's face it. You've got Mateta, who's again back in his pomp, I guess, with lots of returns recently. I think it's 6 returns, 5 or 6
6 goals in the last 5, I think, or 6. Yeah,
it's absolutely one of those players that when he runs hot, he really does run hot, especially under Glasner. If you have a striker that you want to be removed, say you've got Ndiaye, you've got loads of money kind of sat there, and you're thinking, okay, I can't quite get to Watkins, I want to remove him. I mean, they're an interesting team, aren't they? To just think about. You'd have to kind of come up with a strategy, I guess, to maximize them. And if you are one of these people, perhaps who their team is already lending itself to free hit 29, figure out 34 later on, but your team is lending itself to free hit 29, you just go all in, wouldn't you? And just go with Mateta or go with Munoz or both, depending on the hole in your team.
Yeah, and like I said right at the start of the pod, Palace was the one that I was really struggling with going into this week. I wanted to load up on Palace, Munoz and Mateta in particular, knowing that it would lead me down a path to free hitting. And it took quite a lot of convincing internally over the last few days to kind of persuade me against doing that, because I really think they're going to do well over the next few game weeks. It's just, I guess, the opportunity cost of free hitting in game week 29 for my team, given my current scenario and the lack of the lack of players that I need to get out on a free hit already, means that I'm missing out on a more powerful free hit later on in the season, for instance, and I'm kind of willingly taking the advantage away from myself there. So yeah, Palace, I have no doubt over the next few game weeks, especially either side of game week 29, 28 and 30, great fixtures there. I expect them to score very well. And even knowing that I'm not looking to free hit in 29, it is still slightly tempting, but I think I'll probably just wave goodbye to that opportunity for now, probably, and hopefully bring them in and they're still in good form for a potential double in 33.
Yeah, you'd have to just kind of just accept that you've got another player to bench in 29. I guess the only problem would be that you'd be playing like a 4-5-1 in 29, right? Because you'd have Mateta and Isak's going nowhere, right? For most people, most people have kind of got a fairly decent whack in him. So yeah, something to bear in mind. Finally, just on Villa, other than Mr. Rogers himself, we don't know what the situation is for Watkins. Any other interest in that midfield? Obviously, you've got FIFA 2019 legend Asensio there. You've got Marcus Rashford, formerly of the Red Parish, there as well. Came on the 60th minute against Spurs, and you've also got Donyell Marlon, who is a former Arsenal, one of those sort of mercurial players who's been around the European circuit for quite a while. He's actually my bold claim this week. We'll come on to that in a minute. If the only thing of interest really here potentially is that if Watkins is out, Marlon's just been excluded to his chagrin from the Champions League spot. You may see him be given some minutes by Emery just to say sorry. But yeah, you got maybe kind of like a Ramsey, all these sorts of players kind of hanging around. But I don't know if you kind of didn't have Rodgers, are there any other players that if people want to take a Hail Mary in that midfield that you kind of be looking at? Or is it just the case, just stay away? You surely can't be ever really outside of like pure punt, considering a Rashford and Asensio, can you?
Yeah, I don't think I'm there on Rashford given the price. If he started in the cup and looked good, then maybe, but even that would be a bit of a stretch. Whereas at the moment, I think it's more likely that he has to earn his place in the starting 11. Ramsey's obviously doing well, so there's no real need for him to switch it up immediately, especially considering they're on a bit of a Champions League charge in the league as well. They'll want that place secured. So no risks necessary there. Asensio looked really good when coming on, it must be said, and did push Rodgers out to the right-hand side and he played more centrally. So that might be interesting, but again, can't guarantee that he'll start either of the games just yet. It might be too soon for him. Marlon would probably be the one that I'd be slightly more interested in because, of course, he did start and came in a little bit earlier than the other two, so has gotten a few minutes in the Premier League already. And if Watkins is in fact injured, which is obviously pretty 50-50 at the moment, then it looks like he might be a likely replacement through the centre. And then you've got your out of position midfielder playing up front. I think he's 5.5 as well. That could be a bit of a steal if you want to punt on him for one game week. Obviously, the upside is definitely there. But with any double game week, as we know, Watkins might miss the first one, then be back by the second one against Liverpool. So there's no guarantee even on him getting both games, even if Watkins is confirmed by some ITKs that he can't play Ipswich, he might be back by Liverpool. So for me, it's too risky on all counts. Rodgers is probably the only one I'd be going for.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Let's move on to the bold claims. They're still on ice for 24, aren't they? So just to voice them over very, very quickly.
Yeah, so I went for a single game weeker to be top scorer even. That looks very unlikely considering Salah's form in the first fixture. So I think I'm probably out of this one.
Yeah, if obviously we all want this. We want Salah to miss penalty and get sent off. In which case, you will be correct because Wood would have won it, wouldn't he, with the hat trick? So that's what we all want, isn't it? Triple captain is we want Salah to miss penalty and get sent off. Let's manifest it together. Let's build a prayer circle. No,
For my bold claim, which everyone cares about.
yeah, it's not going to happen, is it? I mean, Salah returns are death and taxes, and mine is that an Everton player outscores Salah in double game at 24. Well, I mean that's probably not going to happen. I'd love an Ndiaye hat trick. I'm not going to say no.
Does Moyes count?
Oh, I don't know.
Because if Moyes gets a table bonus,
I annoyingly I said Everton player rather than asset, didn't I?
I will give you it if it's Moyes. How about that?
All right, let's go for it.
Yeah,
excellent.
Keep it interesting.
Yeah, let's keep it interesting. Okay, we need to get a point on the board, don't we? Somewhere, and then point the
yeah, it's getting embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly. 25.
Right, 25. I'm going for a Bournemouth midfielder, so it has to be specifically a Bournemouth classified midfielder in FPL to outscore any Villa player in game week 25, even though they've got 2 game weeks and, of course, have Ipswich, 2 games in the game week and, of course, have Ipswich in one of them. So any Villa player doesn't have to be a midfielder. Could be Watkins, could be Martinez, could be, let's say, Emery as well, and Bournemouth midfielder. So effectively, it's Cliver or Semenyo. Has to outscore any Villa player.
Wait, any Villa player? That's getting that's a bit of a. I'm not sure. I agree with that because you can just say, well, he's outscored Konsa, who hasn't played a game.
All players. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, fine.
So a Bournemouth, Clive or Semenyo has to outscore any of the Villa players, any of them.
Okay, I think maybe if we solved the any for all, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I've got you. I'm with you now.
I just didn't want to make people think it was combined.
Yeah.
All sounds like it's combined.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm with you. All right. Let's make sure there's no jiggery pokery when it comes to next week. Oh yeah. Well, Mings didn't play, so yeah, to win for Sam. All right. And mine is Donyell Marlin, top scores the game week. No real reason for backing Marlin. He's been a very inconsistent player throughout his career. I've had the close experience of him in fantasy Bundesliga this season. The sort of guy who'd be completely on fire in the first half of a game, maybe grab a goal or something like that, and then disappear in the second half. He's always been a bit like that. And the Athletic article on that described him as such. But as I said, if Watkins is out because of the omission from the Champions League squad as well, I don't mind him as a 5.5 punt. And who knows? I mean, the Ipswich game is a good game. Could end up with a brace, hat-trick, something like that. And then doesn't have to do very much in the Liverpool game to get to 19. It could happen, and that's kind of what I'm going to go for. Very specific, but hey, there we go. Week ahead, best captain, Mo Salah.
Yeah, Mo Salah. Obviously, come on. Any thought on Watkins at all?
Do you reckon he's going to get above 200 again?
Yeah, probably. It's going to be nudging, isn't it? It will probably be like 205. There'll be a few triple captains out there still, but a lot. I think it's limited by the fact that so many assistant managers were active last week, therefore will have to be active this week. And then also they'll be compounded by extra assistant managers also activating this week. So I think that will reduce the potential effective ownership. I think it will be just maybe ever so slightly above 200%. So maybe 205.
Yeah, I really want this to end soon. Not FPL in general, not the season, but this. I don't want two game weeks in a row where your captain's 200% owned is unprecedented, isn't it? So I don't want to. I'll be very glad to see the back of this small time frame of FPL. Teams and plans for the week ahead. So, you're set up pretty nicely, actually, I think, apart from the assistant manager. I know you said about it earlier on, but I really like your team. Obviously, you've got your Semenyo in place finally on the pitch, and finally with those good set of fixtures you've been holding out for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. They're here, Sam. It's ready to go with Semenyo, and it's very much for me whether you do remove an Ahmad for Rodgers on top of removing the Moyes for what goes on. And the Alexander Arnold question is obviously quite big for you.
Yeah, a lot hinges on Trent here. I obviously toyed around with Villa assets. There's no way I'm getting rid of any of my defensive coverage for Villa right now. I don't think the upside's there. Into midfield, Ahmad's the only one that I could even feasibly get rid of. The rest are Salah, Palmer, Semenyo, and Burmo. There's just no way I can get rid of any of them for a Villa player. So Ahmad is basically the only one remaining that there's even a debate on. Up top, Isak and Gakpo. Obviously, Gakpo's not going anywhere. Isak, I want to hold on to, and I don't want to replace him with Watkins given the injury doubts. So, yeah, I mean, on paper, I really like my side outside of the fact that there's not much Villa coverage. I will be buying Emery if Trent is fit. If Trent isn't fit, then I might do something a little bit clever there and downgrade him to Kirkes to give me an extra single game weaker in 29 and obviously good fixtures in the meanwhile. And then it gives me the opportunity to upgrade Moyes directly to slots. Although I'd still be a little bit tempted to go with Emery for the upside and the table bonus. I think slot is probably the more sensible pick because it does give me triple Liverpool rather than just going double Liverpool and one Aston Villa. I think on balance, I'd marginally prefer the triple Liverpool there. So all things willing, I think I'll probably go in with 4 double game weekers, including Emery, and just keep the rest as it is on the starting 11. I'll probably leave Ahmad and hope that against Spurs, even though he's up against Jed Spence, who someone mentioned to me earlier, I think they can still probably profit against that Spurs lineup, and they've got some great fixtures to come too. So I think I'm just going to hold on to him for now.
Yeah, I don't quite think it's worth selling him. He's still kind of creating the underlying data. I know General pointed out on his pod that just during the last week when Nice were abject, he still managed to kind of top score in terms of the underlying data, and he is that sort of player, isn't he? But just be prepared for disappointment. But every now and again, you can spike a bit of variance with Ahmad, and that's kind of what you want a player that I bought in at 4.9. So you've got a bargain of the season thus far. For me, very similar situation to you. I need to make a defensive transfer because my defense is an absolute disarray. Trent with the injury, obviously Gabriel, great. And I'm forced into playing Mikalenko away at Palace as it stands, but he could be injured too. And on the bench, I've got Van Useless, Van Hecker against Chelsea at home, and Hall away at Man City, neither of whom I want to be playing. So, if Trent is okay, then Van Useless, Van Hecker does go for Kirkes. I know that Van Hecker does have a game in 29, but that game is against Man City. So I think that's kind of, I'm fine getting rid of that. That's basically selling a 0 anyway, effectively. If not, or if I'm still a little bit uncomfortable about Emery Slot's description of Trent's fitness and what's going on, there is a decent chance actually that I do move Trent out to Kirkes and then get Slot in, just because I don't know, it's getting those meat and potatoes, 20 points. So I think on balance, Liverpool do win against Wolves and Villa. There's no world in which I'm not going to have triple Liverpool for both of those games. Also selling Trent now, even though it wouldn't be favourable, I'd be taking a bit of a gamble effectively. He's not going to play both games 25, does mean that it sets me up a little bit nice in 29, because even though I'm taking a hit to do it, and that move does kind of gain me an extra player in 29, whereas if I don't sell Trent, then obviously I do need to make an extra move going forward. So there's a couple of things to kind of think about. I'll be waiting until it's a Friday deadline this week, so I'll need to be kind of hot on it. But I think that, I don't know, at the moment I'm 60-40 depending on news. If I had to gun to my head, make a transfer now, I would be selling Trent for Kirkes and getting Slot in. But obviously that's kind of really heavily contingent on the news. And I'd ideally love to be selling Van Useless, getting him out of my team, frankly. So has a dual positive if I had to go that way. Obviously I hope Trent is fit, and then obviously we just hope for an Emery masterclass. But yeah, that's kind of it, really. The rest of my team is pretty good. I think if I get double Bournemouth with Kirkes and Cliver, I'm pretty happy with that. Ignore Mr. Andy Martin, who I do love, but his provocations on in the bad place about his wife about to give birth and things like that, I'm sure it's going to be nothing. If it is something, then Andy's going to feast on it forever. But it wouldn't be something that I'd be worried about. And yeah, elsewhere, I don't know. I think it's probably going to be all right this week, he says. And then he'll walk into another inevitable massive red arrow with Rodgers going wild, Wood going wild, and then the rest of my team absolutely failing. But surely, Sam, we can't have another week of all double game weekers doing the points and always in game weekers doing absolutely sod all, can we?
I hope not, because if it happens that way, we're both a little bit screwed again. But yeah, I think with both of our sides, we've ended up in a relatively similar place again. It's mainly now Rodgers and probably Wood that we are exposed to in terms of ownership. So I'm hoping that they both have a quiet one. Rodgers is obviously less likely to have a quiet one, given he's got 2 fixtures, one of which is against Ipswich. But I think we can probably cover it off, and then longer term, our teams look better placed for game week 29 as well. So I'm pretty jealous of your side. I like the idea of having Cliver in, having double Arsenal defense as well looks really strong right now. So yeah, it looks like a good team going into game week 25. So fingers crossed for a green arrow for you as well.
Yes, fingers crossed indeed. All right, there we go. I think that's everything for this week. Let's hope that tomorrow brings us good news.
Yeah, for sure. Fingers crossed on tomorrow. Obviously, if you're watching or listening after the Wednesday game's been and gone, you're probably laughing at us for even dreaming of an Everton table bonus win there. But fingers crossed for now anyway. The hope is still alive. In the meantime, thank you all so much for listening. We have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky at WGTA or myself at FPL Pricey. You can find us on Twitter, X, on WGTA_FPL or FPL Pricey again. Instagram and Threads is WGTA.FPL. FPL Pricey for me as well. If you did enjoy the pod, if you could give us a follow on those social channels, that'd be greatly appreciated. But also if you could give the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening. And of course, leaving a like and hitting subscribe on YouTube is also greatly, greatly appreciated.
Yes, indeed. Thanks for listening and watching. We'll be back at the usual time next Tuesday. We hope to assist you think about the chip season to come. Goodbye, goodbye. It's time to run. Goodbye, goodbye. We hope you had good fun. See you next Tuesday.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?